Hello, the internet, and welcome to another episode of the Cracked Podcast. My name is Jack O'Brien. I'm the editor-in-chief of Cracked.
The bastard stepchild of a 55-year-old humor brand that only ever existed because somebody in the 50s looked at Mad Magazine and was like, yes, me too.
This week we're talking about movies that illustrate mind-destroying thought experiments. Probably without intending to. Some movies are about kind of mind-blowing ideas, and they know the hell out of that fact. Like Interstellar, the characters spend 30 minutes just talking about how crazy physics is. And Contact, the movie based on the novel by Carl Sagan, which I'm convinced actually that Christopher and Jonathan Nolan saw that and loved it when they were younger like me. And then they went and read everything Carl Sagan wrote and were like, wait, why didn't he put all of this in the movie? If we ever become the world's favorite makers of movies, we will do that. We can keep the guy who played the priest in Contact. He was handsome. I like to imagine them saying for some reason. But Contact and Interstellar are both chock full of interesting ideas, and we're talking about neither of them. Instead, we're talking about movies that we've spent so much time watching and thinking about that we noticed some plot holes in them, pretty standard movie fan behavior. But then we went and read books about philosophy and physics until we came up with reasons that those plot holes actually make sense.
Hello, Jack, and thank you. My name is Kyle Stushnoff. I am a researcher at the University of British Columbia, and I am doing a narrative inquiry on your podcast. Let's see. Episode 60 of the Cracked Podcast. Mind-blowing movie thought experiments. Let's see how you introduced this podcast. Last year, Christopher Nolan's Interstellar took advantage of some of the most up-to-date quantum theory we've got and wove in a story about space travel, time, and relativity. While that movie went out of its way to include actual science, others just happened upon quantum theory accidentally. Just take a screenshot of your write-up and we'll post it up. Cracked editors Jack O'Brien, Michael Swaim, and Soren Bowie. Or is it Bowie? It's never quite clear. The three of you have been doing podcasts for quite a while. This podcast, episode 60, was on January 12th, 2015, but it goes all the way back to August 19th, 2013. And it sounds like you started off, as Soren says, the three amigos, but you've had lots of hosts. It definitely plays to an audience of, I would say, 30 to 40-year-old North American males. You have some female co-hosts that come on and talk about things, but it's generally aimed for the people that researchers like Mark Prensky would call the net generation or digital natives. Now, of course, there's some question about what is a digital native, or are there such a thing as digital natives, but the people who grew up in the 80s and 90s when things like microwave ovens, video games, and DVDs were available. I was really excited when you mentioned Interstellar in your write-up, and of course you don't mention it a lot in your podcast. You mentioned some cool movies. I'm really excited to hear more about these Back to the Future theories that you feature on your website. I'll include some of them in the video that I'm making right now. And what I'm finding is that if there are such a thing as digital natives, these are the people that would have grown up watching movies, whether they were on VHS or more likely DVD and Blu-ray. And it's through these digital resources that we do get a better sense of quantum physics. You mentioned some in your book. I'm really excited to share some of your thoughts from here, as is Jack, one of the editors who madly put this book together. So back to Jack, and I'll come back a bit later to share some of my findings.
I'm joined by my occasional co-host, writer star, editor of many if not most, cracked video, Mr. Michael Swain.
Ahoy, hoy.
And Soren.
All right, the three amigos back together again. The guys who really started this podcast as the hosts getting back together again. This is really great.
Michael, you pitched this idea, so why don't you explain what the fuck you were talking about?
Sure. Well, I'm glad to say a little bit about how the sausage is made. I pitched basically like, I love talking about quantum physics. Not that I know enough about it to be considered an authority in any way, but I love talking about a layman's understanding of quantum physics and what I've basically been able to glean from the internet and how mind-blowing it is.
You also wrote one of my favorite articles on the site back when you were a columnist, an article that kind of showed me a new direction that Cracked could write. It was called 5 Scientific Theories That Will Make Your Head Explode. And you just like really examined a bunch of different quantum theories and just like sort of advanced scientific theories in a way that was really straightforward and funny that, you know, we hadn't really done a lot of that sort of thing before.
Yeah.
And so that's why I let you. It's not just that you like talking.
Right.
A lot of people like talking about stuff, and I don't let them.
Just wanted to jump in here with a couple of observations on the conversation so far. Here is the write-up for the podcast mentioning how Star Wars The Empire Strikes Back gets the same gravity time dilation as Interstellar almost by accident. The point you and your senior editors want to make, addressed later in the podcast, is that artists like George Lucas, Quentin Tarantino, and Christopher Nolan stumble onto quantum theory, whether it's planned or not. I know the creation of Interstellar had actual physicists working for it. Kip Thorne was one of them who released his book. But here we have in the D textbook, again, you and your writers seem on a mission almost to undo a lot of the damage that schooling has got. I love chapter 5 on physics, and you talk about the big bluff and how the laws are more of a suggestion, really. This is also a point that gets taken up in Stephen Hawking's Brief History of Time. As you can see, it's got a lot of detail on what you call the spaghettification of the astronauts entering into the black hole. Of course, other scientists have picked apart Interstellar for the impossibility of entering a black hole without the astronaut turning into spaghetti. I'm going to skip ahead to the podcast where you talk about time travel and how it connects with one of the movies you've already mentioned. I'm also going to include a couple of clips from another one of the Crack senior editors, Mr. Cody Johnson, who was not part of episode 60 but gets a shout out from Michael from a staff meeting that you would have had in planning the podcast. Back for more later.
And now it's only like I told you. Oh baby, wash my feet.
I love that, and it touches on another thing that I think that a lot of movies, like Cody at the meeting just kept whispering new movies that it's an example of.
Yeah, there's a new one coming out. I think it's called Almanac, that I think tries to do a similar thing where it tries to treat time travel as
blockbuster primer
faithfully as possible. Yeah, but that actually leads to something really interesting. Have you ever heard of the bartender paradox? Have either of you heard of that? Mm-mm. Okay, let me try to describe it. I may ruin this, but the bartender paradox, it's basically just a thought experiment, but it's about time travel, and it basically proves how crazy time travel is, and I'll tie this to a movie at the end of it. But the bartender paradox says that there's a young woman who meets a drifter. She gets pregnant from the drifter. The drifter disappears. She's still got this pregnancy.
Is she the bartender?
Hold on. Whoa.
Okay.
Whoa. Sorry. She goes to a doctor. The doctor says you have both male and female sex organs, and you can deliver this baby, but due to some sort of weird consequences, we have to take away one of your sets of sex organs. So you just become a man at the end of it. She does this. She has the baby, turns into a man. Her name is Jill. Let's just call her that so it's easier to remember who she is.
Complicated thought experiment.
I know. Jill turns into
Jill's
a man.
a man.
And
this
the
is
baby,
Adam Sandler movie, right?
The baby
Jack and Jill?
disappears. The baby disappears. She doesn't know where it goes. Through the loss of her baby, she's so distraught, she becomes a drifter. She goes to a bar. She tells the bartender this experience. The bartender tells Jill, if you want to fix this, you can join this time travelers club and go back and I can help you fix it by doing these very few things. And she says, okay. They time travel back. She becomes the drifter who impregnates her old self.
Right.
Then she steals the baby. puts it on the steps of a church or whatever, and then she becomes the bartender as well and tells her about this process. So it becomes a closed system then, and what that means, and like how can time travel possibly work if it's a closed system. And it made me think, oh, what about the possibility if you take away the second two movies, if in Back to the Future, Doc Brown is Marty from the future and has just come back to 1985 to teach himself about how to build a time machine.
Which would violate their rule that you can't meet yourself if the universe is destroyed,
Right.
but that's one of the most arbitrary time travel rules ever.
And you know
There's
what?
no reason for that.
So yeah, that's actually interesting because it doesn't make sense, right? There's no reason in physics that it should make sense. So what if that's just him being like, yeah, don't think about me being you. You can't meet yourself or else time will tear a hole in itself or something.
It's Bruce Willis and Looper saying, look, don't think about it. It's not important.
Right.
Yeah, wiping it away. But you look through that movie and Doc has no friends. He has nobody else that he's attached to in that world. You don't know that he's necessarily from 1985. If you're to trust like our actual timeline, you can't build a time machine in 1985. He built this thing in the future and then came back. So whether or not he's actually Marty, it doesn't matter. It's still weird that he would come back and befriend this child, and for what reason?
That actually really illuminates and supports a macro video that we ran recently or are yet to run about incredible foreshadowing that you didn't notice in movies. And one of them is in Back to the Future when he first meets Doc. There are knickknacks on his desk that represent all the major story beats of the film that are yet to happen, even though Doc in this timeline purports to not know the future or anything. And in our video, we were just like, who knows why? They just did that for fun. But that totally supports like, well, because he's Marty, and he knows that part of Marty's life is Doc can't already just tell him what's going to happen. He has to go through it. That closed system paradox comes a lot. It's the same with Terminator 2, right?
Wow, there are some amazing mind-blowing thoughts shared in the bartender paradox, and it is a testament toward the power of a narrative to make complexity more appealing. While Michael set the standard of discourse with his 2008 article, Soren brings to the microphone the stories that expand upon the theories and connect to familiar movies for those growing up in the home video and computer era. With the development of mobile internet devices, such stories add to the public body of knowledge. The author Douglas Adams describes human relations to technology through various ages where anything that's invented between when you're 15 and 35 is new and exciting and revolutionary, and you could probably get a career in it. So Jack and his co-hosts Michael and Soren are well established in their niche. Other parts of the podcast discuss the Flynn effect and artificial intelligence, seen as an increased creativity within a digital society. It extends way beyond the advent of computers, however. Both Finnegan's Wake and To the Lighthouse are examples of two novels created at a time when quantum physics was an emerging field of studies. While these early adapters to the wild new theory could be seen as exceptions to the Flynn effect, where average intelligence increases with each decade, the 1920s and 30s get called legally retarded by Jack, but here we have artists leading the way towards a new understanding of the unseen particles that make reality. Joyce's Finnegan Wake gets special mention here for inspiring physicist Murray Gell-Mann to name the subatomic particles quarks in 1964. The artists have their influence on a science just as scientists influence the arts, as in Back to the Future, Pulp Fiction, and Interstellar discussed in this podcast. Even the talented writers and editors on the Cracked website create their digital and multimodal art through web design, articles, video, and of course, the weekly podcast. I'm going to jump ahead, hoping that any viewers of this video will be able to find the podcast and listen to the full episode. I will also give credit to the many video clips I used to fit into my research project, and thank you once again for listening to my report.
Instead of thousands of drowned Hugh Jackmans, there are thousands of exploded, disintegrated Rich Martys blowing around the parking lot of the Lone Pines Mall across millions of alternate universes. That's the other theory. I like this one better. Doc is old Marty. It's a closed loop. Well done, Soren, I think his name was. All right, that's enough of that. On to footnotes. We listened to Easy Rider by Action Bronson, which is off Jensen Karp, host of Wolf Pop's Get Up On This, just got up on...